Welcome. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Congressman Neguse. Wonderful. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Excellent. Well, welcome to COLTT. We are absolutely honored to have you, Congressman Neguse, and all of you student leaders joining us today for a conversation. This is quite an honor, and we're looking to have a conversation addressing the power of student advocacy in shaping today's policies in higher education issues. My name is Kate Miller, and I am with the Office of Information Technology, serving both CU Denver and CU Anschutz Medical Campus. And I'd like to give an opportunity for my co-host to also introduce herself, Dr. Addison.
Thank you, Kate. My name is Joanne Addison. I'm a professor in the Writing, Rhetoric, and Technology program on the Denver campus, and I just served 3 years as faculty council chair for the entire CU system, and that was really great. And I'm also a resident of CD2.
Thank you, Dr. Addison. Students, I would love to provide you an opportunity now for a quick introduction. And Mary, if you are all set, we're going to go ahead and start with you. Just your name, campus affiliation, and student leadership role, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Mary. I am representing Colorado State University in Fort Collins as the student body vice president for the upcoming year.
Thank you so much, Mary. Christian?
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Christian Dixon, CSU Fort Collins student body president. Excited to be here with you, and yeah, excited for our conversation, Congressman Neguse.
Thank you, Christian. Astrid?
Yeah, hi. My name is Astrid Villalobos. My pronouns are she, her, ella. My campus affiliation is Front Range Community College in the Boulder County campus, and I am SEC representative for the incoming year. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Astrid. And finally, Ben.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you so much, Congressman, for being here. I'm looking forward to this discussion. My name is Ben. I go to the University of Colorado Boulder, and I serve as the co-chair of the Environmental Board, where I oversee the budget and operations of the largest run environmental center in the nation.
Thank you so much, Ben. And Ben, you're a little bit muffled, so I don't know if perhaps you can move a little bit closer or change the audio in any way, but just so you know, just a little bit muffled. So thank you so much. Thank you all for your introductions. Congressman Neguse, we would love if you would so kindly introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to join all of you for this event, and certainly looking forward to what I know will be an insightful conversation and discussion. I serve as the representative for Colorado's 2nd Congressional District in the United States Congress. I have served in that capacity since 2019. Prior to that, I served as a member of the Board of Regents at the University of Colorado. I represented the 2nd Congressional District at that time as well for 6 years, from 2009 to 2015. I'm a proud CU alum, both undergraduate and my law degree, and have also worked in a variety of other different capacities, but very supportive of the university, and so inspired to be able to join with a group of young folks who are working very hard to change their communities and ultimately to change the world. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And you're absolutely right. These are an exceptional group of students. And at the COLTT conference this year, it is all about the students. It's the year of the student. So we really want to provide all of these great folks to ask questions of you. And this is our reason for being here today. And the students have drafted these questions to ask of you by keeping in mind the landscape of higher education, the mission of the COLTT conference, and of course, your priorities as well, Congressman, such as affordable housing, educational equity, affordable textbook pilot, climate action, and of course, many more. In addition, with the overall hope of creating a space for continued collaboration and dialogue across our campus communities and funneling into our government as well. So with that, let's get to it. Mary, we would love for you to start us off with your first question for the Congressman.
Yes, of course. So my question is, the pandemic continues to have impacts on the mental health of college students. Studies have shown the disparities of the impact COVID has had on white communities versus people of color, further hindering students' ability to succeed in the classroom. what steps do you suggest college students must take in order to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion are at the forefront of all aspects of higher education, especially as we deal with the impacts of the pandemic now and in the years to come?
Well, that's an excellent question. Thank you for posing it. And I think that the premise, which is to say that the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 and the public health emergency that followed has had on underserved communities, minority communities, Black communities, brown communities, I think that the empirical evidence, empirical data bears that out. And that is reflected, of course, not just in terms of interactions with our healthcare system in the country, but of course extends to, as you said, the experience of college students and also students within our K through 12 system as well. And so doing what we can to make sure, as I have tried in my career and as we continue to do in the Congress now, that equality and justice is a reality for each and every American. That is a goal that we all aspire to accomplish. And it's something that takes meaningful and committed action on the part of folks who would like to see those changes accomplished. In terms of our college settings and the university settings, I think there's a lot more to be done when it comes to both recruiting and retaining students of color, underserved students, first-generation students. We have made some gains over the course of the last decade or so in Colorado, for example, at various four-year institutions, including the University of Colorado and the different campuses of the CU system, but there's still so much more to be done. And in my view, I think the way to do that is to fund the programs that we know work. On a statistical basis, we can demonstrate that investment in programs, for example, like the CU LEAD program, which I was familiar with from my time at the University of Colorado Boulder as an undergraduate, can have a tremendous impact in terms of retaining students of color, the various services that are provided as part of those programs, including in the mental health space, as you mentioned, I think are incredibly important. And so, I looking at it analytically and trying to find the places where we know an investment will really make a difference, to me, is perhaps the most important thing that we can do. Finally, I would just say the pandemic has been a heavy burden for all of us as a country, really as a planet. And I would certainly encourage those of you who are watching, whether you're a student or not, to check in with your friends, to check in on your neighbor, to check in on your classmates, make sure that they are doing okay and that you are also taking care of yourself and that you're ultimately taking advantage of the various services that are available within our community from a mental health perspective.
Thank you for that answer.
Are there any follow-up points? Christian, I believe that you are our next question asker, if you have yours prepared. So please.
I do. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Congressman Neguse, for your response there. And I'll start with this by saying I know a lot of the audience members for this conference are passionate about technology and academia and equity and sort of the marriage of the three. And so I'd be curious to know here, I guess, with my question is that the pandemic has magnified the disparities in outcome between communities with critical digital literacy and those without. And it's also demonstrated, obviously, the disparity in access to technology and textbooks required for remote education. So my question for you, Congressman Neguse, is how will you work to close those digital equity gaps, including but also beyond improved infrastructure, and ensure that all students can grow in their critical digital literacy, irrespective of socioeconomic status and race? And then also, how should institutions of higher ed, on the other side, be collaborating with state and federal partners to close those digital equity gaps in Colorado?
Great question. And I think the way that you teed up the confluence, I guess, of those three factors, I think was well put, well stated. With respect to the latter part of your question, this is more broad, not perhaps singularly focused on higher education, but more on the K through 12 system. There is no question that we have to do more at the federal level to invest in broadband across the country. There are communities in my congressional district where students, you will find elementary school students, middle school students, high school students at a local McDonald's where they may be able to get better connectivity and be able to connect and be able to do their work than at home. There is a huge gap in rural America and in urban America. And it is something that demands the attention of policymakers in Congress. Fortunately, I think folks in the Congress are finally starting to pay attention to this and to treat it as the crisis that I believe it is. We are poised, my hope, in the course of the next several weeks to pass, or perhaps the next several months, to pass an infrastructure bill that would make a significant, arguably transformational investment in broadband and finishing the last mile in community after community, both in Colorado and across the country. And it would have a tremendous impact for those students. Now, with respect to higher education, and of course, broadband matters a great deal there as well. But I would say that as we look at addressing the high cost of college, we need to look at everything from textbooks to tuition. We're leading an initiative in the Congress, one that my predecessor, Governor Polis, began when he served the 2nd District to advocate for open access textbooks for college students. It's a simple, common step way that we believe we can take to ultimately even the playing field for students across the country. The COVID-19 pandemic, as you mentioned, has already increased financial strain on college students. And for many, it has compromised their ability to pursue higher education. And in my mind, open textbooks, which are, I'm sure many of you are aware, of course, but they're free to the public under an open license. They're a crucial alternative because increasing the availability of those textbooks, students can ultimately, they won't have to forego buying textbooks because of their costs, and instead will have improved educational outcomes. So I think that's a good example of something that we can do that is bipartisan. The Affordable Textbooks Act is a bill that I introduced that would remove barriers to free online textbooks and help students save money and moves us towards more affordable higher education. We have to do a lot more, but I think that that's one example of a way in which we can make an impact.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you highlighting that point, Congressman Neguse, because that's something that obviously we've talked a lot about at Colorado State, is the idea of open educational resources and hoping that the Colorado Student Government Coalition and other unified student advocacy groups can start to push for this. And like you said, those resources have been there. I can't remember the exact dollar amount, but that Governor Polis did have that grant for institutions that were working on it. I don't know what the status is of that now, but I'd be curious to know, maybe follow-up question there, of how do you see student governments and students fitting into this equation of helping, I guess, extrapolate what is right now what you described as a federal effort? How can we bring that to the ground level at our institutions, working with faculty members, working with faculty councils, and addressing some of those barriers that you highlighted?
Sure. Well, I would say, there's no more important skill, or perhaps not skill, no more important tool at your disposal than your voice. I started my public service career in student government, like you. I was one of the student body presidents at the University of Colorado Boulder as an undergraduate, and it opened my eyes to a world in which you can really make a difference, working with each other, building coalitions, lifting your voice in support of a public policy change that would inure to the benefit of the folks that you are elected to serve and that you represent. And in the case of my experience in student government, our advocacy was largely tied to increasing funding for public higher education. As you all know, Colorado ranks near the bottom of states across the country in terms of our investment in public higher education in our 4-year and 2-year institutions. And so we thought it incumbent upon, as students, on us to step up and to make the case to policymakers at the state level, in that particular instance, state legislators, about why we need to do more to fund public higher education as a community good, is ultimately an investment that would benefit everyone in the community and that has incredible economic impacts beyond the ones that might be obvious. So in any event, I would just encourage you, there are many ways in which you can get involved and make the case to policymakers, myself included, federal policymakers, state, local, about why for example, open textbook program may be important to you, or there may be other priorities that you believe are necessary to move the needle, so to speak. And I think lifting your voice in support of those changes is incredibly important.
Thank you, Congressman Neguse.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. I appreciate you centering this kind of back to the action piece of it, and how can you as students create that action within your communities. And I appreciate your responses, Congressman Neguse. Astrid, I would love to pass it over to you now for your question for the Congressman.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Yeah, so my question is also similar around textbooks, but I did want to take a step back and share a little bit more about myself. As a Mexican-American student, I've really had the opportunity to learn about history of the US through two lenses. The first lens being the textbooks that are taught and read in my classrooms, and they often contain a Eurocentric viewpoint. And the second one taught by people from underrepresented communities that have lived experiences and shared stories and realities of the past and present. With that, my question for you, Congressman, how can we advocate for institutions of higher education, as well as K through 12 schools, to teach a more inclusive, accurate, and empowering exploration of history so that we have a better understanding of the truth of our history to better inform our present and future learning?
It's a great question. I would say, I mean, of course, as you know, those decisions as to what is taught in our local schools, for example, at the K through 12 level, are subject to local control and ultimately up to those jurisdictions. And we elect school boards in the vast majority of jurisdictions across the country that have the authority in concert with the superintendents and those folks who govern those institutions to make those decisions. And I would say, not to belabor the point here around action, but in my view, the most important thing that you can do, to the extent that you believe there ought to be a shift or a change or a calibrating of various educational materials and courses and whatnot, either in the college setting or in the K through 12 setting, is to get involved. At the end of the day, I mentioned at the top of the call, the top of the presentation here today, that prior to being in the Congress, I was a member of the Board of Regents at the University of Colorado. I was elected when I was a student, a graduate student, a law school student at the university. And I ran because I believed that students, being the chief customers, the consumers of the product, the quality education that they are receiving at the university, that they ought to have a voice in determining various the various ways in which the university would be governed and the path that the university would pursue and the goals that the university would hope to achieve. And so I ran on that basis and ultimately was elected. And the regents serve as sort of the board of directors for the University of Colorado. And I offer that experience, I suppose, as indicative of what I think, to the extent folks are interested in trying to change an institution, the best way to do that is to become involved in that particular institution. Now, of course, again, it's outside the ambit of my role as a congressman, but as an American citizen, I think it's incredibly important for our students to learn American history in its full context. And I think, what I have challenged folks to do when posed with this question or similar questions is that, in my view, you learn more talking to somebody who disagrees with you. You learn more talking to someone who might have a different worldview than your own. And the same goes, of course, for our educational materials and the lessons we learn. It's important to have a full diversity and in kind of a holistic way, because you learn a great deal more in doing so. So anyway, that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and adding a little bit more to that piece, I totally agree. Growing up throughout the K through 12 system in the same town in Longmont, I just realized really at a really young age that I had to go outside of my classroom and the usual textbooks to learn the stuff I wanted to learn more about, and specifically things that reflected me as a Latinx student and a first generation student in this country. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that information. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
I'm going to hand it off to Ben to ask his first question. Ben?
Thank you, Kate. And does my audio sound good?
Yes, it's much better. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. So a lot of the discussions that I've kind of that I've noticed surrounding sustainability tend to be centered around actions that people can take at the individual level, such as using more efficient transportation, composting and recycling, and turning off the lights in their homes. These can all make a difference, but a big issue like climate change cannot just be solved by actions people take at the individual level. I initially joined the environmental board because I wanted to make as big an impact as possible regarding an issue I am passionate about. What advice would you give to today's students who want to make as big of an impact as possible regarding an issue they are passionate about? And specifically, what do you think the role of faculty members and university administrators should be to help students make a positive impact in the world?
Great question, Ben. Well, of course, I'm familiar with the e-board and the important work that they do, and have a number of dear friends who served in your capacity, in the same capacity that you now serve many years ago. And I would say, first and foremost, obviously, with respect to the specific issue around protecting our environment, I don't think there is an issue more existential, a threat more existential than the threat of climate change. It is the defining issue of our time. I believe it will be the defining issue of your generation and the generations that will succeed your own. And it's why entities like the e-board and other organizations on campus, on various different campuses, that are making the case that we ought to make the necessary investments to protect our environment are incredibly important. And certainly it's a top priority of mine in the United States Congress. I would just say, and I know this isn't the point, I don't think this is what you were conveying, but it's worth me stating, which is that you are right that in order to truly meet, for example, to avoid the most catastrophic consequences that are outlined in the IPCC report or any number of other empirical studies that have been done, we need to take systemic, significant, substantial steps at the federal level, both legislatively as well as on the regulatory side. That has to happen. That's the only way that we will ultimately avoid the most catastrophic consequences that we're already beginning to experience in our communities. But individual action is important, and there are things that we can do at the local level, and of course, and as units of government, as communities, and that includes university communities. And of course, you know this, and you wouldn't be on the e-board if you didn't feel passionately about that. At the end, I think of the quote of from Robert Kennedy, a personal hero of mine, of kind of one ripple, right, of hope. And I think there's a great deal that can be done at the individual level, and I would certainly hope that folks would take every opportunity to do that. Colorado, just by way of example, for your own reference, I know you know this, Ben, but for others, is one of the worst states per capita when it comes to recycling. One of the worst. We have a deep ethos here in our state of protecting our natural environment, right? Because it's who we are as Coloradans. We're blessed to live, in a state with incredible treasured public lands that we hold in trust for the next generation, and yet one of the worst states when it comes to recycling. So I think there are things we can do at the individual level, and I think, to your point, the core question I believe you're posing is, kind of how I would recommend folks engage, whether it's on that issue or any other issue that they are passionate about. How do they, and what role faculty can play in helping. For me, I can only speak to my own experiences on the campus during my time at CU. The most important part of my advocacy and activism was coalition building. There are a multitude of opportunities available to students who are interested in advocacy on everything from protecting the environment to expanding healthcare to addressing the epidemic of gun violence in our communities. And I think that the more students build coalitions amongst themselves and utilize faculty as mentors in that regard, to the extent that they are willing. And I will just say from my own personal experience that faculty members I worked with as a student were always willing to assist. And it simply took, a student being willing to ask and being willing to make the request. Oftentimes they are waiting for a student to kind of take them up on that offer. So anyway, I think that that would be my advice.
I think that's really good advice. I think a lot of what we've tried to do is coalition building. In fact, this past semester on Earth Day, the Chancellor announced his goal of our campus reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. Our board played some role in helping to get to that goal and helping to get to that announcement by building a broad coalition on campus. I've had professors who are very passionate about certain issues. I've had professors who teach classes related to environmental policy, who are passionate about these issues and who really appreciate the work that CU student government is doing. And I think that having faculty members play a role in that coalition building to help students make the big change that we need to see on our campus is really good advice. So thank you so much for that answer.
Excellent, Ben. Thank you so much. And it is important, I think, between that, I go back to the recycling piece, Congressman Neguse, where we live in a state where it would clearly seem evident that this is important to us, given our natural landscape, but there's a disconnect there between actually doing the action of recycling and reaping the benefits of recycling and protecting our beautiful lands. And I think it's something closely related to perhaps the classroom, where we want to have inclusive pedagogy. And that is a desire, but getting there is one thing. So I find that disconnect interesting because there is a willingness, but how do we get over to action? And part of it is that coalition building, that relationship building, coming together with those communities that do feel the same. So, and those that don't as well, perhaps having that conversation can also help make headway on these initiatives. So thank you so much, Ben. I'd like to cycle back and Christian and Mary, we have one question from CSU, the second round. So I will leave it to one of you to pose that question to Congressman Neguse.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kate. So Congressman Neguse, basic needs are really important at CSU, and it's been a major part of our conversation around how we're resourcing it, and most importantly, how can we partner with other institutions at the state, at the federal level to fund basic needs. And I'm thinking about housing and food security more specifically. But I think about that as institutions of higher ed work towards that commitment of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and observing the barriers to inclusion that impact students. The national data from the Hope Center in 2018, which is a study of about 86,000 college students, revealed that about 56% of those students were experiencing housing insecurity and 45% experiencing food insecurity. And then you look at data from, for example, the Inside Higher Ed, it shows that 75% of Indigenous students, 70% of Black students, and 64% of the Hispanic or Latino students experience basic needs insecurity. And so my question for you, Congressman, is how should institutions of higher ed approach this topic of housing and food security, and what strategies will you employ to ensure that housing and food insecurity are no longer barriers to obtaining a college degree in our state?
You know, I think an important part of the conversation, or perhaps rather an important part of how the university administrators ought to evaluate this particular issue and address it, first and foremost, is disabusing themselves and others of assumptions, faulty assumptions, in my view, that have existed long before the pandemic it became a reality about the economic security of students. Because I think there is a general assumption amongst the general populace, and I don't mean to, I'm not maligning administrators here, because I actually think most administrators are very attuned to this, more attuned than most. But nonetheless, the general perception or assumption that the food insecurity and affordable housing constraints and obstacles that exist in our broader population in the country don't exist on our campuses. And of course, there could be nothing further from the truth, as you said, and you've articulated any number of statistics that I think demonstrate that. Across Colorado, there was a survey done by Hunger Free Colorado, a great organization, last year, I think in November or December. And according to them, nearly 40% of Coloradans are food insecure, meaning they lack reliable access to nutritious assistance. And so obviously, for the various reasons that you said, all the statistics that you mentioned, housing affordability, food insecurity are real problems on campuses in our state. And the first step to solving those problems is acknowledging that there is in fact a problem. And it sounds like you all have already moved far past that first step, which you should be applauded for. In terms of what we can do, there are a number of things that in Congress we're doing. I would be remiss if I didn't talk at least a little bit about how we are trying to address the problem. We were glad just this year to secure some pretty significant investments in food security and support for homeless populations. In the American Rescue Plan, there was a proposal that Senator Bennett and I worked on together to increase SNAP funding by 15%, which is a big deal and would have a real sizable impact on many families in our community in Fort Collins and Boulder across our state. And we're excited that that was ultimately signed into law. There'll be more for us to do in the coming weeks and months and years ahead. On affordable housing, I don't need to tell you this, but of course, the same pressures that everyday Coloradans are experiencing by record-breaking, unprecedented housing constraints in our state on the Front Range in Fort Collins and Boulder County and the Denver metro area, really across the state. Our college students are experiencing as well in terms of higher rents. And so again, in my view, I think part of the reason that this issue has been sort of one that has not attracted the type of investment that perhaps other issues have attracted on campuses is because it has been an issue that is largely ignored, and I don't think folks have really come to terms with. So the most important step, the first step, acknowledging that there is an issue, and then from there, of course, making the necessary investments to fix it, to resolve it, and of course, working with federal policymakers and state policymakers to ensure that that those needs are also met at those respective levels.
Astrid, I'd like to move to you now for your second question. And Congressman Neguse, we have Astrid and Ben with their final questions. And then we'll just summarize our thoughts here today and allow you to ask any questions that you may have wanted to ask. But Astrid, I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Yeah, on the same note as Christians, I also had a question about access to the resources and things on campus, and more specifically for first-generation students. As a first-generation student myself, I can't help but notice the disparities related to the use of on-campus services between first-generation and continuing generation peers. For example, financial aid is available to students. That doesn't mean all students and parents are financially literate and they understand the process of applying for these services. On that note, how can we ensure that students and parents get equitable access and have the knowledge of essential resources within the higher education landscape to help set them up for success?
I think it has to be a community effort, and it has to involve, the commitment of, or requires rather, the commitment of every student, every faculty member, every staff member of the university. I hearken back to what I said at the opening of this presentation, which was the needed investment in some of the programs that have worked really well and been very effective in recruiting and retaining students of color and first-generation students, underserved students as example. And I think those programs have done a really great job of trying to disseminate the resources that you described that many students don't know about and wouldn't have reason to know about if they're a first-generation student, if parents didn't go to college, the kind of whole new world that they are exposed to as a result thereof in terms of that particular setting and the various resources that are available to them. I think it's incumbent upon the university to step forward and to try to do its part to communicate those resources. The worst thing in the world is to have resources that are available to students that aren't utilized. I mean, that isn't in the best interest of the student. It's not in the best interest in the university, and it's certainly not a good use of taxpayer dollars or any dollars for that matter expended by the university. So I say that it takes everyone, including students, because when I was in student government, again, much of my work was coalition building and coordinating between different student groups on campus to try to do our part to get the word out to different communities about the resources that exist. There's no silver bullet, there's no panacea. I don't have a particular program that I would say would solve this issue and would, all of a sudden ensure that every student on the campus receives the information that they need. But I think if everyone is leaning in and trying to do their part, well, certainly you'll be much more likely to get to that outcome.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. And I mean, personally, from even my experience as a first generation student, I was in high school, I remember I didn't even know about first generation scholarships. I had no idea what that even meant. And I always remember having all my instructors and counselors having such a bias towards community colleges. So after I graduated from high school, I had no clue what I wanted to do. As I think even as Latinx students, we do have a bigger pressure in our homes to support our families because they tend to not be have English as a language. There's just more support that is needed in our household. So sometimes a lot of students, even in my community, have to go immediately into the workforce. And even thinking about having the time to, apply for a scholarship or get connected to that mentor, that person that's going to help you with this is not the easiest way to go about that. But my question is more, so do you think it's something that it specifically needs to get tackled at a younger age, or something that college students need to be connected with K through 12 schools? Or I don't know. I sometimes I feel like there's that lack of connection between even a community college here in Longmont and the high schools in my town. I don't know I don't know how that connection can be established, or what are some suggestions you would say, how can we really connect to even those boards? Like you mentioned, often K through 12 boards tend to be their own system and their own way of doing things. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's any note or thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that you've articulated both the problem real well, but honestly, I think you've also articulated the solution. I mean, your own experience in high school and now in college as a first generation college student, you have the opportunity. Of course, you have a very busy schedule, I'm sure, and many commitments, but you have the opportunity to also reach back and to help those students who are in a very similar position as you were not too long ago, not in the not too distant past. I would think that you calling your old high school and offering to visit with any students who might be interested in learning more about what extracurricular activities and organizations they ought to be exploring, because those particular organizations, or rather participation in those organizations, will position them well to attend a four-year public college, and giving them advice about perhaps topics to think about for their college essays. And by the way, I don't mean to put this on your shoulders. I say that because it is a constant obligation. It's something that it does not end. It is lifelong. When you are in graduate school or in law school, I imagine you'll be doing what I did, which was reaching back to assist those college students who, like me, didn't have parents who were lawyers or who had any kind of legal training, and didn't necessarily understand the importance of being able to to prepare and how to prepare for the LSAT, a very important test, and ultimately a barrier to many in terms of attending law school. And of course, when you're in private practice as a lawyer, or in any profession that you might have, reaching then back to those graduate students, and on it goes. There's nothing more important for me in my development in terms of my public career and the opportunities I've had than mentorship. I never would have been able to be elected to the United States Congress absent mentors who helped me along the way. Some of those mentors were faculty members whom are treasured friends to this day. Some of those mentors were people who were like me, folks who had been where I was and were able to give me the lessons learned as I embarked on my own path. And so I would encourage you to do the same.
And Astrid, as someone who's also, a proud community college graduate who eventually went on to get a PhD, what I would say to follow up is invite a faculty member to go with you. Take that faculty member and say, because faculty don't know how to get into individual high schools, especially if they're not from the area. But if you go to a faculty member and you say, hey, I really want to go talk to the seniors from the high school that I was at. And this is part of the coalition building you've all been talking about, and the mentorship and seeing education as a public good. I would just ask students over and over again, grab a faculty member by the hand and say, come with me, let's go do this together.
And just to really follow up with that as well, Astrid, I'm also a first generation student, so I can definitely relate to that. I think approaching it with an educational aspect of what is a first generation student is also a good step to take, because I didn't know that I was first generation until the second semester of my first year. So that leap of, you are first generation and this is what it means to be part of that community, I think would also be very helpful.
Wonderful points. There's power in your personal experience, and sharing that with others means a great deal. Thank you. Ben, will you close us out here with your final question, please?
Yeah, so my question.
Close out the questions.
Yeah, so my question relates to the topic of environmental justice. And one thing I've noticed is that the concept of environmental justice, the idea that climate change does not affect everyone equally, has gained a lot more prominence in discussions surrounding environmental issues. And in fact, I first heard the term environmental justice used in April 2020 in discussions about why COVID has disproportionately affected communities of color and lower income communities. Do you think that it is important to center conversations about the environment around issues of environmental justice? And do you think that recent efforts to limit the teaching of environmental justice and other concepts that relate to critical race theory in schools can make it harder to create a more just and inclusive society in the future?
Well, what I would say is, I think environmental justice in terms of the conversation around climate change is incredibly important. I think, as you said, and I've worked to protect the environment and champion efforts in the fight against climate change for quite some time. Environmental justice, or at least the emphasis or even the attention to environmental justice, is fairly new, and it is a positive development in my view, because of course, as you said, at least with respect to COVID, but of course it's much broader across the entire prism of this issue, which is to say that communities of color are often the frontline communities when we talk about the effects of climate change. Some of the most polluted zip codes in the United States of America are zip codes in which average incomes are far lower and where they're predominantly underserved populations, Black communities, brown communities. So I think that the focus on environmental justice is an important step in the right direction. Certainly the work that we're doing in Washington in terms of trying to address the climate crisis, there is a sizable portion of the funding that we are pushing for as we try to make this renewable energy future a reality that would go towards addressing environmental justice and remediating those wrongs. So I think that's incredibly important, and something that I'm pushing for in terms of environmental justice at the federal level.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. I think that with an issue as big as climate change, action has to start at the federal level more than anything else. And I think centering those conversations, centering those policies around environmental justice will really take us a long way to right past wrongs. So thank you so much for that answer.
Well, students, Congressman Neguse, I thank you so very much for being here with us today, having this illuminating conversation. I wanted to pass it over to Dr. Addison to close us out today with any final remarks. I have been very honored to be part of this conversation, and I thank you again. Dr. Addison?
Well, one thing that I've noticed is two themes that are not news to anyone here that have been recurring throughout our conversation is the need for coalition building, the need for working together, no matter what the issue is, as well as everyone doing their part so that higher ed is seen as a public good or a community good, which it's not always seen that way. And from those two things, many, many good things can follow. And so I really appreciate seeing those themes throughout our conversation. And I would like to give Congressman Neguse a chance to, close us out. And if you have any questions that you in particular wanted to talk to the students about, anything that you would like to say here.
No, I would say I think that your summation was spot on, and in my view, one of the best parts of serving in the Congress is that you get to meet a lot of people, and you, in particular, get exposure to talented, insightful people, and in particular, young people, students like yourselves. And I see much of my work in the Congress through the prism of being a young father. That's kind of my frame of reference. My wife and I have a 3-year-old daughter. And so much of the work that we're doing now is to ensure that the world that she will inherit is a sustainable one and perhaps a better one, we hope, than when we found it. And I worry about the confluence of crises and challenges that we face as a society and as a country, and the world that she will inherit. But I am reassured, and those fears, I guess, are put to the side after having conversations like this one, where I can, hear from such talented young people like yourselves. And I have no doubt that with all of you at the helm in the future, our country will be in good hands. So I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you'll continue doing the important work that each and every one of you are doing, and becoming the change makers that you are in your own right. And you'll certainly have a partner in me and in my office as you embark on your careers. So thanks for having me.
Thank you again, Congressman Neguse. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our time together today. Goodbye.
Hello, Ben. Can you hear me? This is Angie Piccioni.
Hi, Angie. Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Ben. Where are you situated right now?
I'm at my house in Louisville, Colorado.
Okay, fantastic. You're the first student here, so so I thought we'd just go ahead and just at least introduce ourselves. I'm the executive director of the Department of Higher Ed, and I sit with the governor's cabinet. So there's 20 cabinet members, and of course about the same amount of governor's staff. So we meet once a week and update the governor on what's happening in our departments. And where are you in school right now?
So I go to CU Boulder. I will be a rising junior this fall, and I am a double major in political science and sociology.
Wow. I was also a double major in political science and psychology. So good for you. And are you enjoying, where did you go to high school?
I went to high school at Centaurus in Lafayette, Colorado.
Okay, yes, I know it. All right. I used to teach at Smoky Hill High School in the Cherry Creek area. So so I know some Centaurus from its sports programs primarily. Well, good. And what do you hope to do, Ben, when you ultimately graduate?
So my hope is to eventually go into public policy at either the state, local, or federal level, possibly pursue a master's in public policy. And I'm particularly interested in environmental policy.
Oh, wow, that's great. Yikes. That sounds very well thought out, I should say. You have anybody in your family that is doing that, or how did you zero in on that?
Want to do something that can make as big a difference as possible in improving our world and making people's lives better. And I think that public policy is really the best tool available to do that. And particularly environmental policy, I'm very passionate about environmental issues, concerned about the impact that climate change could have on our society. And I want to make a difference solving some of these big challenging issues.
Wow, was there anyone in particular or anything that really inspired you to pursue this? Do you have family members who are in this field, or was there something that you saw or read, or what inspired you?
I don't think there was any single moment or any single person that inspired me. I think it's just really following current events, what is going on in the world, and basically wanting to make a difference in that regard.
Yeah, good for you. It is somewhat rare. I think, that especially not being particularly influenced by any one thing or one person or one event that happened in your life, or, you travel someplace and you saw the impact of the environment on, so that's good. The passion to make a difference is often what drives people. And I'll tell you this, what I have found in all of the work that I've done, both as an educator, but also as a consultant globally for business leaders. I have found that the folks who are most successful and most fulfilled, both together, because you can be successful by the world's terms, but not be fulfilled. And you can be fulfilled, but not be, quote, successful by what the world's measurements. But when you have both, it's mostly because people are passionate, that they are aligned with what they're doing, and their own personal values are really aligned. And they are striving to do something bigger than themselves, so to make a difference. And so it sounds like you're on your way to having all of those things met. So congratulations to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you a couple questions. Like, my role, of course, is to try to make sure that students can be successful in our institutions of higher ed. You're at one of our flagship institutions and one of our most beautiful campuses. How has it been for you being at CU Boulder? Has it met your expectations? What about, financial aid? Did you need it? Did you get it? Advising, has it been good? Are you floundering? Tell me a little bit about your experience at Boulder.
It's been a really good experience so far. I think one of the biggest strengths of CU Boulder and really the entire University of Colorado system is the support services available for students. Of course, I've had so many really great faculty members who have kind of inspired me and who've been really helpful, but also other resources, particularly advising, and all of the people who I can work with who make it clear that their goal is to help me succeed and to help every student succeed.
Wow. Wow, I wish we were videotaping that. I could really use that. That was well said. And it's a nice endorsement, so to speak, of some of the services at CU Boulder. Yeah, fantastic.
Hello, I apologize. I was kicked out and the system wouldn't let me in, so I just made my way back in. I apologize. I'm Joanne Addison. I'm a professor on the Denver campus and recently served as faculty council chair for the CU system for the last 3 years. And we've met before. 3 years ago, you came to faculty council. So
That's right.
I really appreciate that. And I want, by way of introduction, I've also put this in the chat. I wanted to let everybody know a little bit about Dr. Piccioni. And so you can see a bit of her bio there in the chat. And if I remember correctly from 3 years ago, you also had a basketball career. Is that true?
I did. It feels like another lifetime ago, but I did play collegiate women's basketball. I played professional. I played on some of the U.S. teams. And so and then I was also the first woman in Colorado to coach boys high school varsity basketball at the big school level. And so, yeah, basketball was very, very good to me. And then I kind of left it behind. And then I think right about 95 when I went up to CSU to become a professor up there. So I left the basketball. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, excellent. Well, that's great with the Olympics. Maybe you've been watching the women's teams. So
yes, the 1980 Olympics would have been my year, and so I'm always a little bit certainly appreciative that the athletes get a chance to actually compete, especially now. Not political, but the pandemic could have really. I mean, it did put it off for a year, but it could have made it even worse for them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Ben, you and I are going to carry this with Dr. Piccioni because our other students, I believe other people are having a hard time getting into, but I know people also have a schedule. So technology, right? This is how it goes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Ben and I have been chatting already. We've talked a little bit about, do you know Ben?
We worked together on the recording with Congressman Neguse.
Oh, okay. I thought so. That was just before this one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought it was going to be like a round table. I wasn't sure if I was. Oh, it's post Neguse plenary. Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Shucks. I wish I had been able to get in on that one. I would have loved to hear what he had to say. Ben, what was your biggest takeaways from what Congressman Neguse had to say?
I think it was the advice he gave. One of the questions I asked him. And I should, I guess, introduce myself a little bit farther. My role, the reason I was participating in this panel is that I am the co-chair of the environmental board at CU Boulder, which is part of CU student government. It is the oldest student-run environmental board of its kind in the country, which is a really unique setup, kind of that the CU system has. And then my big kind of question to him was, what advice would you give to young people today who want to make as big a difference as possible? And I think the biggest piece of advice he gave, my big takeaway, was the importance of building coalitions, talking with different people, and kind of pursuing a difficult but at times very important end goal.
Wow, that's great. And I have been speaking with the sustainability officers for CU, and I convene the student leadership, your elected student leadership, usually once a month. We'll start up again probably in September. And one of the things we've been talking about is what can the institutions do to advance the adoption of renewable energies? That's one of the governor's key goals, is to be at 100% renewables by 2040. And what are the ones that we can do? How do we take advantage of the quote, I call it the real estate on the tops of buildings? Can we just is it worth just putting, solar panels on the top of our buildings, or even wind turbines on the top of we have so many buildings on our college campuses that it's like, how can we really leverage them and take full advantage of the real estate on our rooftops. And I don't know if it makes any sense to do any of those things, or if it's, cost prohibitive, or if it doesn't, produce enough energy or things like that. But every time I fly and I come into cities and I see all of the rooftops, I just go crazy, because, we don't have the land on the ground, but we certainly have the real estate on the top of buildings all over. So.
I think one of the things that, which this is something that came up in the conversation with Congressman Neguse, even we had to actually cut quite a bit out. So even some of the stuff that was cut out is about collaborations, right? Student, faculty, community collaboration. So for example, talking about rooftops, CU Denver has a little beekeeping operation on one of its rooftops. And I don't know if that beekeeping operation survived the pandemic, but there were experiments and looking at what happens if you keep bees out in this, real estate, this untapped real estate, and how do you join forces with students? And so it's these coalitions and this is really important. And one of the things, Ben and Christian, who's joined us, who's our student leader from CSU, one of the things that we also talked about was open educational resources quite a bit. And Astrid talked about this a lot, and her role as a first generation Mexican-American student, is having our educational resources reflect experiences like hers, and having that sort of critical cultural narratives and literacies throughout. And so we talked about those collaborations a little bit, Ben and Christian, and wouldn't it be great if our institutions could fund groups of students and faculty who get together, and together they build those textbooks through open educational researchers,
We do fund that.
Groups of, students are getting paid to work with faculty. Is that because the students need the money, right?
Sure. If you submit a grant that has those things in it, I think that those can be considered. Yeah, absolutely. We do have funding for that. The state legislature actually renewed our grant, and so we've got dollars to distribute, and especially for innovative grants like that one, as long as they're related to expanding the use of OER. Sure, I don't see why not. Yeah, it's very exciting. So yeah, you guys be the first ones, submit some grant proposals for that. And I don't know all the criteria off the top of my head, but it sounds like that would be something that would be worth funding, especially if the ultimate outcome is that we produce more OER materials, and that there's a way to expand that and scale that within a department or within a discipline. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that'd be great. So if anyone wants to join me on a grant, let me know, Christian and Ben, and we'll touch base with Astrid. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really great. Those are the kind of things. And by the way, the governor is a big supporter of OER. He was when he was a congressman, and he certainly is as a governor. He's not pushed us because he didn't have to. We were already going in that direction at the department. But we've had great successes. In the 2 years of the last grant, we saved students over $4 million in textbook fees. So that's really we're very happy about that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Christian, why don't we give you a chance to follow up with anything you might want to follow up on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to see you, Dr. Paccioni.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, I know we've had the chance to talk about basic needs resources many times before on some of our student government coalition meetings and otherwise. But I'd love to know maybe where the governor, where your department stands on it, and opportunities that we have to advance those resources. I know that's one aspect that I've spoken with our food security director at CSU Fort Collins, and building out that sort of legislative advocacy wing is something that I'm excited for. And I'd be really curious to know just what you see the trajectory looking like based off of what we obviously asked Congressman Neguse about.
And you're talking about in terms of basic needs like food insecurity or housing or transportation, those kinds of things?
I'd say the main one would be food security, and then housing security is a related component. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a big initiative in our department on what I'm calling the social determinants of student success. And so some of the social determinants, one, of course, is food insecurity. Another is housing insecurity, transportation insecurity, and then also mental health services. And so those are the four main issues that we are really addressing. This first year, we've been focusing primarily on food and on mental health. And so we have created a new designation that an institution can earn called a hunger-free campus. And the second one is a healthy minds campus. And so there's a whole checklist of you have to meet certain things in order to earn this designation. Happy to say CSU Fort Collins was one of the 4 first institutions to earn both designations. Metro is, MSU Denver is, Fort Lewis, I believe, is, and then CSU Pueblo. So those were the 4 first institutions to earn those designations. And so we're very excited about that. We are also now, with the food insecurity, also looking at SNAP benefits, which used to be called food stamps. Listen to this statistic. It boggles the mind. Right now in Colorado, 80,000 Colorado college students are eligible for full SNAP benefits. That's $234 a month that they can use to buy food. Now, if you times 234 times 80,000 students times 12 months, that's about $224 million that the state could be getting, if you will. That would be an economic stimulus because it would go right into the local grocery stores. So, you know, if you're a student and you're eligible, I know that there's a social stigma that might still be attached to applying for it. And so we're working with a group called Single Stop. And Single Stop is an organization where it's a one-stop shop, so to speak, where students can apply for all of the federal benefits to which they might be entitled. So right now, I think MSU, and I think there's one other school, it might be, I don't know if it's UCD or CCD, but they are now working with Single Stop. As a state we are, so we get technical assistance from them. And so we'd like to see more of our institutions get hooked up with Single Stop so that students, you know, don't have that social stigma and they can get the benefits to which they are entitled. So how does that sound, Christian?
That's amazing, Dr. Paccioni. I really appreciate hearing that context, and I also appreciate that you highlight the stigma, right? And I think that's something that I know the team at CSU, obviously, they talk about that a lot, right? Of this idea of how can we adapt resources so that, I mean, and I think SNAP benefits is a great example, right? I know they've talked about this before, where it's a little more discreet, right? Because you have that, what I would assume is a credit card, right? Or what looks like a credit card that has the funds loaded on. And so no one would really be able to distinguish you from another person who's just shopping at the grocery store. And I think obviously it's twofold. I think on the side of how can we adapt resources so that it can be utilized in a discreet way that doesn't cause additional stigma. But I also think it'd be powerful if we have more dialogue around what it means to embrace our collective need, right? And this is something, whether it's storytelling or whatever that venue might be, right? I know mental health has come up. Wouldn't it be so cool if we could get leaders from all across Colorado to do a storytelling series on their mental health journey and why it matters?
Wow, it's a great idea. We
I thought
may
I'd
have,
put it on your radar. I know. I'm
that's
trying to
right.
plant the seed.
We may have to pursue that one as well. Yeah, and what we are trying to, and the governor is helping by talking with the Secretary Vilsack, who oversees the Department of Agriculture, under which SNAP sits. It's weird, but because it has to do with food and food production, it sits under ag. But he's trying to levy with Secretary Vilsack to have the SNAP benefits be also used for campus food plans. And so right now they can't be, but we're trying to push the legislature to change that ruling so that a student who qualifies would be able to use those benefits in the dining hall if they want to, so that it would be universally more acceptable. Right now, that EBT card is used for grocery stores. If you have a what do you call it? Like a convenience store on your campus, you can also use it at the convenience store, but you can't use it right now in your dining halls. And so we want to change that. So we're working. I mean, we're working behind the scenes. A lot of that doesn't get, front page reporting, but these are the things that are really important to us, because it's important to us that every student's potential gets activated, and that no student either stops out or drops out because of food or because of housing or because of some of the those basic needs. And so we are definitely focused on those.
I think I'm really glad to hear this. I'm learning a lot, actually. So I really appreciate this conversation. One of the things I worry about, though, is that so many people don't see themselves as college students, right? So how do we do a better job of making those connections in the first place so then we can then open them up to these services? I mean, how do we do that? You just want to this kind of conversation makes you want to walk to your local high school and gather them all up in a hub and take them over to the closest college campus and then sign them up for everything they need, right? But that's not how it works. So how do we do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because right now Colorado is one of the lowest states in terms of our college going rate. Only about 57% of our high school graduates go on to anything post-secondary. And so that is not enough to sustain really our systems in terms of higher ed, but it's also not enough to maximize individual potential, right? So we know, and all of the research shows, that the more advanced degrees you get, the more you're self sustaining, so to speak. So you don't rely on government services. And so it's in our best interest, all of us as the big capital O our, it's in our best interest to make sure that every single person in Colorado maximizes their earning potential and activates their full potential. And so we know that if you get even a credential past high school, that's going to give you more earning potential. And if you get a degree past high school, it's going to maximize. And if, like Ben talked about, going on to get a master's, if you get a master's or an advanced degree, then all of those things, the return on the investment increases your earning potential and your ability to be a contributing member of the society. So how do we get that message out? We are doing town halls. We haven't done those before. We started those just before the pandemic hit, but we're doing town halls for 10th, 11th, and 12th graders and their families to talk about some of the benefits that are available and some of the benefits that you get from post-secondary enrollment. And we haven't cracked the nut yet on how do we change that? How do we get, every high school counselor has too much in their caseload, so they can't give the individual advising to every single high school student. That's what we need. My Colorado Journey. Are you familiar with this app called My Colorado Journey? If you're not, take a look at it. And My Colorado Journey is that attempt to say, okay, most young people are tech savvy. And so My Colorado Journey helps you chart your path, whether it's in a college or in a profession, but it helps you kind of chart your path. Here's what's needed. Here's how you apply. Here's how you apply for FAFSA to get federal funds and things like that.
And what I'm curious, and Ben and Christian, I'd be curious to know if you had any experience when you were in high school, but I'm curious what programs are in place to get college faculty into the high schools and maybe even middle schools, and to start working on that pathway with our colleagues in the K-12 system. And as I say that, I can see my college colleagues saying, oh my gosh, don't give us more work. We're already working so much. And I get that. At the same time, as you're saying, this is a system that we all have to take a part in sustaining. So how do we do a better job of making those connections?
Well, that's a great idea, is how do we really pair up college professors with the educators, especially in high school, that are in that same discipline. And so, Ben was talking about majoring in poli-sci and psych and sociology. I majored in poli-sci and psych, but to have a sociology professor at the institutions of higher ed match up with somebody who might be teaching psych or soc at the high school level, to be able to have those kinds of relationships. And I think one of the things that we are trying to do, and that we have improved, is concurrent enrollment. So high school kids can take those college courses, build their confidence that they can actually succeed in that class and earn college credit. And so the more we can expand concurrent enrollment, at least that gives the student the opportunity to experience college, so to speak. So that's one way to do it. And we just released last week, released our concurrent enrollment report that we do with the Colorado Department of Education, the K-12 partners. And so that shows that we've expanded it. We've also seen more students of color participating in concurrent enrollment. So that's good as well.
And this is a great way, this is where technology can help us quite a bit, right? Because especially with concurrent enrollment, you can have the college faculty teaching in the high school because you can do this all, you can do an online class with their, like say I'm teaching an English class, I can teach it electronically in the classroom, and their regular classroom teacher can be there as my teaching colleague, as my co-teacher, and we work together and we get that down, and it's a real college experience.
Yes. Well, yesterday we just announced the partnership between all of the community colleges in Colorado, the whole system. There are 13 community colleges, and a partnership with Colorado School of Mines for engineering. So students can go, they can be in Craig, Colorado at Northwestern Community College, and they could be taking a class that's being taught in the community college system. So it might be being taught at Front Range, but you can take that class, and that class will give you the credits and the transferability to go right into School of Mines and major in engineering. Now, of course, you have to be a good student. It's not a free pass. You still have to do the hard work, but now you can do it from around the whole state. And I think that kind of access is really, really, it's beautiful because it's so student-centered. So a student doesn't have to say, hey, I'm in Sterling at Northeastern, and we don't have that class that I need to get into mines. Well, now you have it. It may not be taught in Sterling, but you can take it from Sterling, and it'll give you the credits necessary. So the more of those kinds of partnerships, like you said, and those collaborations, I think that's going to really help create more access and opportunity for students.
And Ben and Christian, if I could center this more back on you and the student experience, you're much closer to the high school experience and the high school experience in Colorado. And as we're talking, what do you see as some of the barriers that, or what are you hearing, in addition to the ones that we've talked about, that help high school students see themselves as college students? Because if you don't see yourself as a college student, it doesn't matter if you have if we offer all these services.
Yeah, Ben, do you have thoughts, or I'm happy to jump in?
Yeah, I can go first and then see what else you have to say. I think, without having looked at any surveys or statistics, I think the two primary reasons that students probably don't go to college are, number one, that it costs too much. Not just the cost itself, but the opportunity cost, the fact that if you're in college, you're not just paying for your education, you're not able to get an income from a job. And I think the second thing is not really seeing yourself as a college student. From my high school, I know there were a number of college visits throughout the year where admissions counselors would come in, talk about the programs that their school offers and the resources. Those were really good. And I think it's especially helpful for students who may not have the resources to actually visit a college campus, to have admissions counselors come right to you. But as far as I'm aware, there were never actually college professors who came into my high school and talked to students about that. I think that, the idea of going to college is very intimidating. One of the times I visited CU Boulder before I decided I would attend there was a sample lecture as part of that visit. Which I thought was super interesting, but it definitely is a little bit intimidating to kind of be in a room with a professor if that's not an experience you've had before. I know that CU Boulder has a pre-collegiate office. I don't know a ton about the details of it, but I know they work with students from as early as 7th grade, students who would be potential first-generation students, to make sure that they get the resources and support they need through high school to help get to college. I think that, as you've talked about, concurrent enrollment is a really good option, giving students kind of the access to get credits from wherever they are in Colorado. Especially if you look at a place like Boulder, where an obstacle is not just the cost of college itself, but it's not a cheap place to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Christian, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, I would just maybe add that I think opportunities like getting involved with clubs and other organizations at the high school level and I know it seems simple, but I come back to it often because it was so transformational for me in my high school journey. Especially, many of you are probably familiar with Key Club, right? The service organization that's youth-led, largest in the world. It was my opportunities with Key Club that honestly shaped a lot of my emphasis and values and the things that I wanted to pursue. And honestly, like this idea of public service, that emerged from my experiences in volunteerism. And so I think if we can lean on the relational infrastructure that already exists at the high school level through obviously clubs and organizations, but also programs like AVID at Fort Collins High School, AVID. It was a program that was targeted towards supporting first-gen students and students of color. And what I think is so powerful about those types of programs is there's sort of this pocket of, I'd use the word relational infrastructure. I think similar to like the TRIO programs at the college level, it builds small communities and I guess identifies resources within those communities. And so I've seen the direct benefits of that. Colleagues of mine that I knew in high school who were part of the AVID program and went on to college. And I think also, I mean, back to your all's point about what it means to identify as a college-bound student, I think it's also important that we identify as a lifelong learner, right? In so many ways. I mean, because it may not just be an undergrad 4 years, right? It may be trade school, it may be community college, like you said, Dr. Paccioni. It may be like my debate coach at Fort Collins High School who went to CSU for his PhD, and he was simultaneously an English professor at Fort Collins High School. And so I think learning takes so many different forms. Adult learners, another good example, right? How can we broaden our definition of a student so that it's a state of mind of wanting to see and experience more? And I think if that's the way we can frame it, coupled with an effort to lower the cost of education, I think it'll be more accessible for everyone.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Christian, what year are you? What year are you going into?
Going into my third year at Colorado State.
Okay. And what are you majoring in?
Political science, and I'm minoring in natural resource economics and Spanish.
Wow. You guys could form a little company there, you two. So, that's great. And what's your hope for? What do you hope to do?
For me?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping to go into public service, honestly, to run for office post-college and serve my community. And I've stayed in Fort Collins for that exact reason, and hoping to stay in Colorado to serve my state as well at some point in my career. So
that's great. And did you go to Poudre High School or Rocky Mountain? Where'd you go?
So I was at Fort Collins High School.
Okay, Fort Collins. Yeah, I lived in Fort Collins for like 14 years. I was the state representative from Fort Collins for House District 53.
Yep.
And did that for two terms. And then I ran for Congress to represent that area and lost by 2.5%. So if you ever want any advice about campaigning and politics, I certainly can help you out there too. But anyway, that's a great ambition. I spoke to someone actually who we might be hiring for our department who also had that. And I said, well, how does working for the Department of Higher Ed, how does that fit into your career ambition if you want to be an elected official? And he said, imagine if I helped the department and I helped this state move the needle on things like our equity gap. Imagine if I was part of that. That'd be a great platform to run on, that I was part of the administration when we really made a difference in terms of students of color graduating from college. And so, it's great where even a political ambition can be matched with, here's a difference that I want to make. And if I know that I'm working my tail off to make that difference, then that's going to help me with my career ambition. So good for you. And in a few years, maybe you'll apply to work for the department too. That'd be fine. So yeah, these are all the things that we are working on. Of course, reducing the cost. It's hard for us as a department and for the governor, even though he really wants to reduce the tuition cost. But what we're trying to do is see how can we contain costs for the colleges so that they don't have to transfer that cost to the students. And so things like reducing the cost of energy, if we are using solar or if we can pool our resources in some way. CSU Pueblo has a solar farm, 26 acres, and that pretty much powers the institution. I think it's 99.something%. And so if we can have those kinds of models, then it reduces one cost here, and that hopefully can reduce the cost or not increase the cost in some other places. And so if we can reduce the cost of textbooks by having open education resources, if we can reduce the cost of food by having, you know, students who are eligible get those SNAP benefits. And so we're looking at how do we, it's almost like a whack-a-mole, you know, how do we get these costs, you know, housing, like you said, Ben, up in Boulder, holy smokes, everywhere in the state now, housing is really, really high. So how do we, are there some, and I don't know, I have it on my list to do for this week, is talk to my counterpart who heads up the Department of Local Affairs. They have all of the housing regulations. Can students apply for housing benefits that are available to citizens, you know, low income housing or Section 8 housing, or and can we build some more of that so students would be eligible? So these are the kinds of things that we're working on behind the scenes.
One question I have in relation to everything that we're talking about at the moment is, of course, the people are talking about the cliff, where the number of eligible high school students to even go to college is shrinking. And yet only 57% of our students are currently going to college. How are you thinking about that particular problem? How are you thinking about, you know, we see private colleges merging and closing. I don't know if, well, I guess there are some places where public colleges, our systems are merging. Do you see—
closing? Johnson and Wales has left the state.
Yeah, exactly. And so do you see, how are you seeing this into the future? And what do you see as the role of, you know, our current student leaders who might be helping us solve this problem, and faculty and administrators? What do you think we ought to be doing now? And how might technology play a role in all of that?
Yeah, thank you. And you know, we have open access institutions. So all of our community colleges, everyone can go to a community college. So there's no admissions requirement for a community college. It's open access. MSU Denver is an open access four-year institution. So you don't really have to have any you know, qualifications. You can just go. And so, we have to always maintain that. We don't want any of our institutions to become so exclusive or cater too much to out-of-state students because they pay twice as much, that the opportunity for our in-state students isn't there anymore. So we want to make sure that we have the capacity to educate all the high school students into the next level. Now, what is also available, and the governor is very, very strong on this as well, he would like to see every high school student graduate with some credential. And a credential could be a career and technical education certificate. So while you're in high school, either take concurrent enrollment enough that you get an associate's degree, which many people actually do. I'm surprised at how many high school students graduate from high school with it already with an associate's because they've taken so many concurrent enrollment courses. Or you know, get your welding certificate while you're in high school. So do your academic work, but then take the welding classes at Aurora, at Pickens Tech, or at any of the other, you know, CTE programs. So he would like to see every high school student graduate with another credential, a high school diploma, an associate's, or a certificate. And if we can get people moving in that direction, then they can see, as Christian said, that it is lifelong learning. That, okay, I've gotten these, and now what's the next one that I can get? And Joe Garcia, who is the chancellor for the community college system, he actually took the welding course, and I think he earned a certificate in welding just to see how long does it take, what's the demand physically and time-wise on getting that. And, you know, we hear that it's anywhere between, you know, like 5 and 6 figure incomes for a welder. So there's nothing wrong about pursuing something. I like to say it, I don't hope it doesn't come across crass, but I don't really care what you pursue. Just get some credential beyond high school. I really don't, because any credential you get is going to help you earn more, and then getting one will also often leads to the next one. So we're trying to get the word out. The governor is helping. He's cut some videos for us, and yeah.
I mean, I think what you said is key. Getting one leads to more, right? No matter what that one is. Super important.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes someone like you to tap someone like these two young men on the shoulder and say, hey, have you ever thought about getting a master's degree? I got my bachelor's and then I played, pro basketball, and I came back to Colorado and I decided to become a teacher. And so I went back to school at DU and got my teaching license. And while I was teaching at Smoky Hill High School, the principal there said, Angie, I think you would make a great administrator. Have you thought about getting your master's in administration, master's in education, but emphasize administration? And I wasn't really thinking about that because I love working with the young people as a teacher, but it's because she saw something in me and said, why don't you do that? I went up to CSU to get my master's. And while I was there, the dean of the School of Engineering tapped me on the shoulder and said, Angie, I think you'd make a great professor. Have you thought about getting your PhD? And I was like, not really. And they said, look, we have an instructor position. We'd love to have you come, and as an instructor, you get free tuition, 6 credits a semester or whatever. We'd love to help you get your PhD. And then we'd love to keep you on. And that's what I did. So sometimes it takes, especially because I was first gen, nobody in my family got a master's and nobody in my family got a PhD. And I didn't even know I could. But it takes having someone in your life, one person who believes in you or sees your potential, to tap you on the shoulder and say, how about you? What do you think about doing this? And so that's the role that we get to play, both as faculty members, but also in the department, trying to, like I said, it's all about activating potential. And if we could do that, we're going to be an even better state.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that's just a perfect place to end, unless Ben or Christian, you want to add anything to the conversation, but I really appreciate your time here.
I think just one other thing I wanted to add, and I kind of wonder if this could, to go back to our earlier discussion about making potential first generation students actually feel like college students, to kind of end that stigma. One thing I was just thinking about is that at CU, the Environmental Center has a program called FLOWS, which does really good work. I think both the idea of sustainability and the idea of education can kind of have this elitist tone at times. What the FLOWS program actually does is it goes into lower income communities in Boulder, not necessarily college students, but lower income communities in Boulder, and helps those communities basically with sustainable activities, build solar panels, help with kind of compost and recycling, and bring an activity that sometimes is seen as elitist kind of down to earth and show how it can really matter in the real world. I think that somewhat of a model like that to show how like education is, how higher education can be a real world activity, the kind of why not me question that you're posing, taking that directly into those communities can be really good. And I think having faculty members, having administrators, be able to sit down with students and really kind of talk to them more about the importance of education, the importance of how that can unlock so many doors going forward. I think that could be kind of really important.
Love it. Great idea. Great idea. Well,
Yeah,
listen. Oh, go ahead, Christian. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Just last thing, Dr. Paccioni, I think what I appreciate the most about how you frame the conversation today is around this idea of self-agency, self-discovery, and discovering one's purpose. Right. And I don't know if there's a simple solution for how we reach that and how we help every single, hopefully college-bound student, just every young person in general to experience that. I know that's something I'm really passionate about is being that catalyst, right, that can unlock the potential of the generation, of my generation. And so hopefully we can be thought partners in this. And for all of us here and everyone who's watching, that we can start to help young people discover that. And I think, what are those meaningful experiences that they need to have in order to realize their future careers, right? Like my sister who came back from Indonesia, right, and worked with the palm oil industry there, well, against the palm oil industry, yes. And working with the orangutans and taking those baby orangutans to climbing class because their mothers have been poached. I mean, it's just like experiences like that you can't help but become an activist after you've experienced it. And that's certainly how I feel about many topics. And having shadowed the city manager, experiences like that where I find my love for local government. And so I don't know what that is, Dr. Paccioni, but I'm committed to finding what those experiences are that can help shape careers.
Wow, you gave me goosebumps. That's fantastic. And I think as we have that mindset and we reach out now, I'm an off the chart extrovert. So wherever I am in the world, when I'm in the grocery store or getting my hair done or something, I'm always asking the people that are working with and around me about their educational journey. And I use it that way. Hey, where are you on your educational journey? And they'll look at me like, journey? What do you mean? What do you mean journey? And I say, well, are you in high school? Are you in college? Are you in between? Are you in a vocational school? And I have had individuals who said, yeah, I got my GED and that's it. And I was like, that's it? I said, come on, there's a whole lot more you can do. Let's look at a certificate program. What do you like? Well, you like to work with your hands. You like to work with your head. You like to work with people. You like to work alone. I said, let's figure out what's a really good certificate program. And we have student financial aid for that. So we can help you get there. So if you're willing to commit to 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, if you were able to commit, we've got programs, on the spectrum that you can find one that fits your time and your talent. And so I'm always having those conversations. I can't help myself. So you guys do too. Start having those conversations. Where are you on your education journey? And let's see what people say to that. But you gave me a good idea, Christian, because I live in a development that we have a clubhouse that I know oftentimes goes unused. And I'm thinking I could just set up, Tuesdays with Angie kind of a thing, where on Tuesday evenings, the families in my community can come and we can talk higher ed. We can talk what's next after high school and see if that, blossoms into something. Real quickly, when I was a legislator in Fort Collins, I started having town halls, and it was before. Now everyone has them, but before nobody was having one. And there was a restaurant right on Shields, and I think the Shields intersect with Prospect, or they're parallel. Can't remember now. The one where there's a statue of a young man right on the corner, and his head is bigger than his body. Anyway, so there was a restaurant right in there, and I used to use the back room. And the first weekend, it was Saturday mornings, I made a little sign that said, "Your state representative at work." I advertised it in the Coloradan. I said, "Come and hear about what's happening at the Capitol." No one showed up. And the second week, no one showed up. And the third week, I invited a friend of mine and her husband. So there were at least 3 of us. And it took a few months before people started to show up. By my 4th year, we had to move to Avogadro's number because we had too many people for that place. So you can build momentum by being present and being available. And so I'm going to commit that I'm going to look for a way to do that right here in my own community. So, woo, you've inspired me.
Well, great. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to Ben and Christian as well. And we'll continue. We will all continue.
Let's please do that. Yes.
All right.